Alexandria, August 30 BC. A teenage boy is running through the streets. He's 17 years old. He's dressed in the robes of a pharaoh, and he's running for his life. Behind him, the city is burning. Roman soldiers are sweeping through every building, searching, hunting, looking for one specific person: him. His name is Ptolemy Caesar, but everyone calls him Caesarion, Little Caesar, because his mother is Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, the most famous woman in the ancient world. And his father, according to his mother, according to everyone in Egypt, according to coins and statues and official proclamations, is Julius Caesar. The Julius Caesar, the man who conquered Gaul, the dictator of Rome, the most powerful man who ever lived. Caesarion is running because Julius Caesar's adopted son has just conquered Egypt, a man named Octavian, a man who will soon rename himself Augustus and become the first emperor of Rome, a man who has already killed Caesarion's mother, a man who has a problem. A very simple problem, a problem that can only be solved one way. Caesarion exists, and as long as Caesarion exists, Octavian's claim to be Caesar's heir is not absolute. Because if Caesarion really is Julius Caesar's biological son, then Octavian is just an adopted heir, a legal heir, but not the real heir, not the blood heir. And in a world where legitimacy matters, where succession determines who rules an empire, that distinction could start a civil war. So Octavian has given an order: find the boy, kill the boy, erase the boy. Make sure that no one can ever use him as a rallying point. Make sure that Caesar's bloodline ends here, tonight, in Alexandria, while the city burns. This is the story of Caesarion, the son Cleopatra raised to be king of two worlds, the boy who wore Egyptian royal titles and carried Roman blood, the teenager who should have inherited the largest empire on earth, and the young man who was hunted down and murdered because he was born with the wrong name. Today, you're going to learn what really happened to Julius Caesar's son. Not the sanitized version, not the version that skips over the uncomfortable parts. The version where you understand that Caesarion wasn't killed in battle, wasn't executed publicly, wasn't given a trial or a chance to defend himself. He was hunted like an animal, betrayed by the people who promised to protect him, and murdered in secret, and then erased so thoroughly from history that most people today don't even know he existed. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications, because this story has been buried for 2,000 years. YouTube doesn't want you to see this. The algorithm buries content that shows how empires really work, how powerful men eliminate rivals, how history is rewritten by the victors. But you need to know, because this isn't just ancient history. This is the template. This is how it always happens. This is what power does when someone stands in its way. Hit that subscribe button.
Click the bell, and let me show you something that will change how you see Rome forever. Because Caesarion's story isn't just about one murdered teenager. It's about how an entire empire conspired to erase someone from existence, how they removed his name from monuments, how they destroyed his statues, how they rewrote the histories, how they made sure that for 2,000 years most people would never hear his name, and how they almost succeeded. The boy who is running through Alexandria right now doesn't know any of this yet. He doesn't know that his mother is already dead. He doesn't know that his tutor, the man he trusts most in the world, is about to betray him. He doesn't know that Octavian has already decided his fate. He's 17 years old. He's been raised to be a king. He speaks 9 languages. He's been educated by the greatest scholars in Alexandria. He knows Greek philosophy and Egyptian religion and Roman law. He's been preparing his entire life to rule. and he has maybe 6 hours left to live. Let me take you back, because to understand how Caesarion died, you need to understand how he lived. You need to understand what it meant to be Cleopatra's son, what it meant to carry Julius Caesar's name, what it meant to be raised as the bridge between two worlds, between Egypt and Rome, between East and West, between the ancient world and the new empire that was about to swallow everything. Caesarion was born on June 23, 47 BC. His mother was 22 years old. She had been Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, for 4 years. She had already survived a civil war against her brother, had already seduced Julius Caesar, had already secured Rome's backing for her throne, and now she had given birth to Caesar's son. At least, that's what she said. That's what she told everyone. That's what she carved on monuments and stamped on coins and proclaimed in official ceremonies. Was Julius Caesar really Caesarion's father? We'll never know for certain. There's no DNA evidence, there are no genetic tests. All we have are ancient sources. And the ancient sources are divided. Some say yes. Caesar acknowledged the boy, brought Cleopatra to Rome, let her live in his villa, let her display their son. Other sources say no. Caesar never publicly claimed paternity, never mentioned the boy in his will, never gave him Roman citizenship. But here's what matters. Here's what actually determined Caesarion's fate. It didn't matter if Julius Caesar was really his father. What mattered was that people believed it. What mattered was that Cleopatra promoted it. What mattered was that the boy was named Caesar, that he was raised as Caesar's heir, that coins were struck showing him as Ptolemy Caesar, that temples displayed him with divine symbols, that the entire Egyptian court treated him as if he were the son of Rome's greatest general. Because belief creates reality in politics. If enough people believe you're the rightful heir, you become the rightful heir. If enough people believe you have a claim to power, you have a claim to power. And Cleopatra made sure that everyone believed Caesarion was Caesar's son. She built his entire identity around it. His name, his titles, his education, his future. Everything about Caesarion was designed to be the bridge between Egypt and Rome. Imagine growing up as that child. Imagine being 3 years old and being told you're the son of the greatest man in the world. Imagine being 5 and having coins minted with your face next to your mother's. Imagine being 7 and standing in ceremonies where priests declare you the living embodiment of Egyptian and Roman divine kingship. Imagine being 10 and knowing that someday you're supposed to rule the largest empire on earth. That was Caesarion's childhood. He didn't play games. He attended state ceremonies. He didn't have friends. He had tutors and advisors and courtiers. He didn't have a normal life. He had a destiny. And that destiny was to unite East and West, to be Pharaoh of Egypt and consul of Rome, to inherit his mother's throne and his father's empire. And then, when he was 14 years old, everything changed. His mother made a choice that would seal his fate. She allied with Mark Antony against Octavian. She chose sides in Rome's civil war, and she chose the losing side. Mark Antony was Julius Caesar's right hand, his general, his friend, his political ally. After Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, Antony tried to claim his legacy, tried to position himself as Caesar's true heir. But Caesar's will named someone else, his grandnephew, a teenage boy named Octavian. Caesar adopted him posthumously, made him his legal son and heir. And Octavian used that adoption to claim everything: Caesar's name, Caesar's fortune, Caesar's supporters, Caesar's legacy. Antony couldn't compete with that legally, but he could compete militarily. He controlled the eastern provinces. He controlled Egypt through his alliance with Cleopatra. He had armies and fleets and resources. And he had something Octavian couldn't match. He had Caesarion, the biological son, the real son, the boy who carried Caesar's blood, not just his name. Cleopatra saw the opportunity. If Antony could win the civil war, if he could defeat Octavian and take control of Rome, then Caesarion could be legitimized, could be recognized as Caesar's true heir, could inherit everything, not just Egypt, but Rome itself, the entire Mediterranean, the known world. Caesarion could become what his mother always dreamed he would be, the ruler of East and West, the king of kings. So Cleopatra made her choice. She committed Egypt's wealth and navy to Antony's cause. She married him, had children with him, built a political and personal alliance designed to defeat Octavian and place Caesarion on the throne of the world. It was the biggest gamble of her life, and it failed. The Battle of Actium, September 2nd, 31 BC, off the coast of Greece.
Antony and Cleopatra's combined fleet against Octavian's navy. It should have been close. It should have been brutal. It should have been the decisive battle that determined the future of the Roman Empire. Instead, it was a disaster. The details are disputed. Ancient sources give different accounts. Some say Antony's ships were slow and unmaneuverable. Some say Cleopatra panicked and fled with the Egyptian fleet. Some say it was strategic retreat. Some say it was betrayal. But the result was clear. Antony and Cleopatra lost. Their fleet was destroyed, their army surrendered, and they fled back to Egypt with Octavian's forces pursuing them. Caesarion was 14 years old when his mother lost at Actium. Old enough to understand what it meant. Old enough to know that everything was about to change. Old enough to be afraid. For the next year, Antony and Cleopatra tried to salvage the situation, tried to negotiate, tried to rally support, tried to prepare defenses. But it was hopeless. Octavian was coming. He had won, and he was going to take Egypt. The question wasn't if. The question was what would happen to the royal family when he arrived. Antony killed himself. August 1, 30 BC. He stabbed himself with his sword after hearing a false report that Cleopatra was already dead. He died in her arms, bleeding out in the palace, while Octavian's soldiers surrounded the building. Cleopatra lasted a few more days. She tried to negotiate, tried to save herself, tried to save her children. But Octavian wasn't interested in negotiation. He wanted Egypt. He wanted its wealth. He wanted its grain. He wanted to parade Cleopatra through Rome as a captive in his triumph. He wanted to humiliate her the way Rome had humiliated her sister Arsinoe decades earlier. Cleopatra refused. She would not be paraded, would not be a spectacle, would not give Octavian that victory. So she killed herself. August 12, 30 BC. The famous death by asp. The poisonous snake smuggled into her chambers in a basket of figs. Whether that's exactly how it happened, we'll never know. But she died. And with her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty died. 300 years of Greek rule over Egypt ended. Rome won. But there was still a problem. Caesarion, the 17-year-old boy who carried Caesar's name, who had been proclaimed co-ruler with his mother, who was, legally and symbolically, the Pharaoh of Egypt and the son of Julius Caesar. As long as he lived, he was a threat, a focal point for resistance, a potential rival, a living reminder that Octavian's claim to be Caesar's heir was not absolute. Octavian's advisors were clear. The boy had to die. There's a phrase that survived in ancient sources, a single sentence attributed to Octavian's advisor, a philosopher named Arrius Didymus. Too many Caesars is not a good thing. That's all it took. One sentence, one calculation, one decision, and Caesarion's fate was sealed. But here's where it gets complicated. Here's where the story becomes a hunt.
Because Cleopatra knew her son was in danger. She knew Octavian would try to kill him, so she made a plan. She arranged for Caesarion to flee, to escape Egypt while she negotiated with Octavian, to get him somewhere safe, somewhere Roman power couldn't reach. India maybe, or Ethiopia, somewhere beyond the empire's borders where he could survive. Caesarion left Alexandria with a small group of advisors. They headed south, up the Nile, toward the Red Sea ports where ships could take him to safety. He was traveling with treasure, gold and jewels that Cleopatra had given him, enough wealth to establish himself wherever he landed, enough to rebuild, enough to wait for another chance. The plan was sound. If he could get out of Egypt before Octavian's soldiers caught him, he might survive. But someone betrayed him, his tutor, a man named Roden, a man Caesarion had known his entire life, a man he trusted completely, a man who was supposed to protect him. Roden sent a message to Octavian. He revealed where Caesarion was going, what route he was taking, how much treasure he was carrying, and he suggested something. He suggested that if Octavian promised to spare Caesarion's life, the boy might be convinced to return to Alexandria, to surrender, to place himself under Octavian's protection. It was a lie. Roden knew it was a lie. Octavian knew it was a lie. But Caesarion didn't know. He was 17. He had spent his entire life being told he was destined for greatness. He had never been betrayed before, never been hunted, never been in real danger. He was raised to be a king, not a fugitive. So when Roden convinced him that Octavian would show mercy, that surrendering was the smart choice, that returning to Alexandria was safe, he believed it. Caesarion turned around, headed back to Alexandria, back to the city where Octavian's soldiers were waiting, back to the palace where his mother had just died, back to his execution. The details of what happened next are sparse. Ancient sources disagree. Some say Caesarion was killed as soon as he entered the city. Some say he was arrested and held for a few days. Some say he tried to escape again and was caught. Some say he was strangled. Some say he was stabbed. Some say his body was displayed publicly. Some say it was buried in secret. The sources don't agree, because the sources were written by people who weren't there, by Romans who heard rumors decades later, by historians who were working from propaganda and incomplete records. But here's what we know for certain. Caesarion died in Alexandria in August of 30 BC. He was 17 years old. He was killed on Octavian's orders, and his death was kept quiet. No public execution, no trial, no announcement. He simply disappeared. And within months, within years, his name started disappearing too. Octavian began the erasure immediately. He took control of Egypt and declared it his personal province. Not a regular province governed by the Senate, his province.
Under his direct control, he seized the royal treasury, he seized the grain supply, he seized everything, and he began rewriting the narrative. Monuments to Caesarion were destroyed, statues were pulled down, inscriptions were chiseled away, coins were melted down. Anything that showed Caesarion as Pharaoh or as Caesar's son was systematically removed. The official story became simple. Cleopatra was a foreign seductress who tried to corrupt Rome. Mark Antony was a traitor who abandoned his duty for a woman. And Octavian was the rightful heir of Julius Caesar who saved Rome from Eastern tyranny. Caesarion wasn't mentioned. He became a footnote, a rumor, a claim that Cleopatra had made but that no one could verify. His existence became questionable. His paternity became disputed. His death became insignificant. Within a generation, most Romans didn't even know his name. Within 2 generations, he had been erased so completely that historians debated whether he ever really mattered. But he did matter. He mattered enormously, because his existence was the one thing that could have undermined Octavian's entire claim to power. If Caesarion had survived, if he had escaped to India or Ethiopia, if he had lived another 10 years, another 20 years, he could have returned, could have raised an army, could have claimed his father's legacy, could have started another civil war. Octavian knew this. That's why he had to kill him. That's why the erasure had to be complete. It wasn't enough to murder a 17-year-old boy. He had to erase the idea of him, had to make sure that no one could use his memory as a weapon, had to rewrite history so thoroughly that Caesarion became a ghost, a rumor, a might have been that never actually was. And it worked.
For 2,000 years it worked. Most people who learn about Cleopatra never hear about Caesarion. Most people who learn about Julius Caesar never hear about his son. Most people who learn about Augustus, which is what Octavian renamed himself, never hear about the teenage boy he murdered to secure his throne. But the evidence is still there, hidden in fragments, in coins that survived, in inscriptions that weren't completely destroyed, in ancient sources that mentioned him in passing, in the archaeological record that can't be entirely erased. And when you put those fragments together, when you follow the trail of evidence, you see the truth. You see a boy who was raised to unite two worlds, who was betrayed by his tutor, who was murdered by his father's heir, and who was erased so completely that history almost forgot he existed. Hit the like button right now if you think Caesarion's story deserves to be remembered. If you think we have an obligation to recover the names that empires tried to erase. If you think the victims of history matter as much as the victors. Let me show you something that will make this even more disturbing.
Because the erasure wasn't just about removing Caesarion from monuments and coins. It was about removing him from the legal and historical record. Octavian didn't just kill Julius Caesar's biological son. He made it legally impossible for Julius Caesar to have ever had a biological son. Here's how. Roman law at the time had specific rules about legitimacy. A Roman citizen's children were only legitimate if they were born to a legal Roman wife. Julius Caesar was married to a Roman woman named Calpurnia when Caesarion was born, which meant that even if Caesar was Caesarion's biological father, even if he had acknowledged paternity, even if everyone knew it was true, Caesarion could not be a legitimate heir under Roman law, because his mother was Cleopatra, an Egyptian queen, a foreign monarch, not a Roman wife. So Octavian used the law as a weapon. He declared that Caesar had no biological children, that any claims Cleopatra made were lies designed to manipulate Roman politics, that Caesarion was not Caesar's son, legally, biologically, or politically. And because Octavian controlled Rome, because he was about to become emperor, because he wrote the history, his version became the official version. But here's the thing. The legal argument doesn't matter. The biological truth doesn't matter. What matters is that Octavian felt threatened enough by a 17-year-old boy that he had him hunted down and murdered. If Caesarion was really just a nobody, really just Cleopatra's bastard with no claim to anything, why kill him? Why go to the effort of erasing him from monuments? Why bother rewriting the history? Because Caesarion was dangerous. Dangerous enough that his existence posed a threat to Octavian's entire political project. Dangerous enough that he had to be eliminated and erased. That's the proof. Not in what ancient historians wrote, but in what Octavian did. Murder and erasure. The ultimate proof that Caesarion mattered. And there's more, because Octavian's treatment of Cleopatra's other children proves the point. Cleopatra had 3 children with Mark Antony, twins named Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, and a younger son named Ptolemy Philadelphus. All 3 children were captured when Alexandria fell. All 3 were brought to Rome. All 3 were paraded in Octavian's triumph, displayed as prisoners, as trophies, as symbols of his victory over the East. But Octavian didn't kill them. He spared them, raised them in his household. Alexander Helios and Ptolemy Philadelphus disappear from the historical records soon after, probably died young of natural causes. But Cleopatra Selene survived. She was married off to a North African king, lived a long life, had children, died peacefully. Why did Octavian spare Cleopatra's children with Antony, but kill her son with Caesar? Because the children with Antony posed no threat. They had no claim to Roman legitimacy, no connection to Julius Caesar.
No symbolic power that could be used against Octavian. They were just children of a defeated general and a foreign queen, useful for a triumph, but ultimately harmless. Caesarion was different. Caesarion was dangerous. Caesarion had to die. And that decision, that choice to murder one child and spare 3 others, tells you everything you need to know about why he was killed. It wasn't about cruelty, it wasn't about revenge, it was about power, about legitimacy, about making sure that no one could ever challenge Octavian's claim to be Caesar's true heir. Share this video right now. Send it to anyone who thinks ancient Rome was noble, who thinks Augustus was a great emperor, who thinks history is written fairly. Because this is what empire looks like. This is how power operates. This is what happens when someone stands between a conqueror and his throne. Let me tell you about the coins, because the coins are the smoking gun. The physical evidence that proves Caesarion existed and that Rome tried to erase him. In the 40s and 30s BC, Egypt minted coins showing Cleopatra and Caesarion together, side by side, as co-rulers. The inscriptions call him Ptolemy Caesar, show him with royal Egyptian symbols, declare him Pharaoh. Those coins circulated across the Mediterranean. People used them, merchants accepted them. They were official currency, which means everyone knew about Caesarion. Everyone knew Cleopatra claimed he was Caesar's son. Everyone knew Egypt was ruled by a queen and her teenage son who carried the most famous name in the world. After 30 BC, those coins started disappearing. Not naturally, not through normal circulation and loss. They were systematically removed from circulation, melted down, destroyed, replaced with new coins showing Octavian, showing Augustus, showing the new imperial symbols. Within a few decades, coins showing Caesarion became rare. Within a century, they were nearly gone. But some survived, hidden in hoards, buried in the sand, lost in shipwrecks. And archaeologists have found them. Modern scholars have cataloged them. And those coins prove that Caesarion existed, that he was Pharaoh, that Cleopatra proclaimed him Caesar's heir, and that someone went to enormous effort to remove his image from circulation. That's not an accident. That's not natural historical loss. That's systematic erasure. That's what happens when an empire decides that someone's memory is too dangerous to survive. They destroy the coins. They chisel the names off monuments. They rewrite the histories. They make sure that future generations will barely remember the person existed. And it almost worked. For 2,000 years, Caesarion was barely a footnote, a name mentioned in passing in ancient sources, a rumor about Cleopatra's son, a question mark in Roman history. Only in the last century have scholars begun to piece together his real story, to recover the coins, to read the inscriptions that survived,
to reconstruct what really happened to Julius Caesar's son. But here's what still bothers me. Here's what keeps this story relevant. The erasure continues. Go to a museum exhibit about Cleopatra, read the placards, look at the reconstructions. Most of them barely mention Caesarion. He's a footnote again, a side character, a tragic victim, but not a central figure. Go watch a documentary about Julius Caesar, about the Roman Empire, about Augustus. Most of them don't mention Caesarion at all, or they mention him in passing, a sentence, a paragraph, not a full exploration of who he was and why he mattered and what was done to him. Why? Because the erasure worked. Because Octavian won so completely that even 2,000 years later, even after we've recovered the evidence, even after we know what happened, we still tell the story the way the victors wanted it told. We still focus on Cleopatra and Caesar and Antony and Augustus, the famous names, the powerful names, the names that survived because empires wanted them to survive. Caesarion's name almost didn't survive. He almost became what Rome wanted him to be. Nothing, no one, a ghost that never existed. And if it weren't for a handful of coins and inscriptions and passing references in ancient texts, he would have been erased completely. His story would be lost. His life would be forgotten. His murder would be hidden. That's the real horror. Not just that he was killed, but that he was nearly erased so thoroughly that we wouldn't even know to mourn him. That's what empires do to inconvenient people. They don't just kill them, they erase them. They remove them from memory. They make sure that future generations don't even know to ask about them. Comment below with one word: Caesarion. Just his name. So the algorithm knows people care. So his name gets recorded one more time. So he gets remembered one more time. So the erasure doesn't continue. Because every time we speak his name, every time we tell his story, every time we remember that he existed, we're fighting back against what Rome tried to do. We're refusing to let the erasure be complete. Caesarion was 17 years old when he died. He had spent his entire life preparing to be a king. He spoke 9 languages. He understood Greek philosophy and Egyptian religion and Roman politics. He was educated by the greatest scholars in Alexandria. He was raised by Cleopatra, one of the most brilliant political minds in history. He carried the name of Julius Caesar, the man who changed the world. And he was murdered in secret, betrayed by his tutor, hunted down by soldiers, killed without trial or ceremony or acknowledgement. His body was disposed of quietly. His coins were melted down. His story was rewritten to make him insignificant. And for 2,000 years, it worked. But it doesn't have to keep working. We can remember him. We can tell his story. We can acknowledge that he was real, that he mattered.
That he was murdered not because of anything he did, but because of who he was. Because he was born with the wrong name at the wrong time, to the wrong mother. Because his existence threatened the man who would become emperor. Because power required his death. That's the truth about Caesarion. That's the story Rome tried to erase, and that's why it matters that we tell it now. Because empires still exist. Power still operates the same way. People still get erased when they become inconvenient. And if we don't learn to see the pattern, if we don't learn to recognize when history is being rewritten, if we don't learn to ask about the names that are missing from the monuments, then the erasure continues. Caesarion deserves better than to be a footnote. He deserves to be remembered as what he was, the son of Cleopatra who might have been king, the teenager who carried Caesar's name, the boy who was murdered to secure an empire, the young man who was almost completely erased from history because he stood in the way of Augustus's throne. If you made it this far, if you watched all 40 minutes, you now know something most people will never learn. That Julius Caesar had a son. That his son was raised to be king of 2 worlds. That his son was murdered at 17. That his son was nearly erased from history. And that it took 2,000 years for us to recover his story. Subscribe right now and turn on all notifications, because this is the history they don't teach. The history that's too uncomfortable, too political, too honest about how power really works. The history that shows empires don't just conquer with armies. They conquer with erasure, with silence, with rewriting the past until the victims disappear. Hit that like button if you believe Caesarion's story matters. If you believe victims of history deserve to be remembered. If you believe we have an obligation to resist the erasure that empires try to impose. Share this everywhere. Send it to your history teacher. Post it on social media. Email it to anyone who thinks the Roman Empire was glorious.
Because glory has a price, and that price is measured in erased names, in murdered children, in stories that were almost lost forever. Next video, we're going even deeper into how Rome rewrote history, into the other names they tried to erase, into the other victims they tried to forget. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Remember Caesarion. Remember that he existed. Remember that he was Julius Caesar's son. Remember that he was murdered at 17. Remember that Rome tried to erase him. Remember that we almost let them succeed. And remember that his name survives now because someone decided to look, to dig, to recover, to tell. Don't let the erasure be complete. Don't let him be forgotten again. Say his name, Caesarion, the secret son of Cleopatra that Rome tried to erase. But we're not letting them. Not anymore. I'll see you in the next one.